there was actually evidence on his phone to suggest that prior to going out and doing that, he'd been arranging another date.
Yes, I saw this bit. So he was arranging a date while Grace was still in his apartment. Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events, and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone and welcome back to episode 17 of the Grave Secrets podcast. We're your hosts, I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth. So in today's episode, we've got another case study for you. We have done quite a few case studies recently, it feels like.
Yeah, I feel like we've just been reeling them off, haven't we?
But I think that's a good thing. And again, we've been working super hard on making sure that the content's right.
Yeah.
So I think hopefully case studies has been the way to go. But as always, if you want to see any other types of videos.
Yeah, just let us know. I feel like all I've done recently is just look at case studies.
Yeah.
Just look and write down and study case studies every single week.
And then even when we're like on one, we're still like, oh, there's this one that we could look at. How about that?
Yeah, or we see something and we'll send each other a link saying, oh, this could link in with this, or we could do this one for the next one. And it's like, I feel like when we actually come round to doing them, I'm like, what are we actually doing this week? We haven't got a diary. We've got too many ideas.
You're back to full health, which is a bonus.
I am. I sounded shocking on last week's episode. I was editing it like, oh my God, I sound rough.
Because you kept being like, oh, I think I'm loads better than I was. And I kept thinking like, you sound dreadful.
Rough. And then I had, it was in the last episode that we did, I think I had to edit out about 20 coughs because you were halfway through saying something and I'd go, oh, Beth, just wait a minute. And then I'd start coughing. So I had to edit out so much in that episode. It took me hours to do that. Oh.
So today's case is a case which is pretty recent, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's a case that you may well have heard of because it was quite prominent in the news at the time, and it also sparked quite a lot of debate, which we're going to talk about, obviously, later on. So today's case is the murder of Grace Emmy Rose Millane. We're going to be talking about, as always, her life, who she was as a person, and then ultimately what led to her murder. It's a super tragic case, as they all are, but it's interesting that they spark different emotions.
Yeah.
So there's been a couple for me that have made me really upset, obviously, but then I've just researching this case, I just was angry. I was really angry about it.
It is, and I think if you watch any of the documentaries on this as well, it's the way that the people act within, and we'll go into that. I don't want to spoil it for anyone at the moment, but I was like furious when they were doing the police interviews.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating, isn't it? I was literally shouting.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
And I think, again, it's like with the Sania case, it's the timeline almost as well, because Grace had only just begun a year of travelling on her own.
Yeah.
She was in kind of she'd finished university, but she was in like a gap year, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Where she was travelling the world. And the offence actually took place the night of, or the night before or the morning of her birthday.
Yeah. Yeah, which was really sad. When I was looking at the dates, I didn't realise that at first. And then I always have a look at, where it says when they were born and when they were died. And I thought, really? And then I thought, oh my God, how awful for her family.
Yes.
As well, because it's not going to be remembered as a nice day anymore. Like Grace's birthday, it's going to be remembered as the day that she was murdered.
So a bit of background for you on Grace. The one thing that was like abundantly clear when we were researching is how well loved she was, but again, how much of a character she was.
Yeah.
She was very confident, had a great set of friends. She'd made loads of friends within university. And I think part of that probably came with like her hobbies. So she had a camera that she took everywhere. Her friends said that it didn't matter whether it was parties or where they were.
She always taking photos.
She always had her camera with her. And again, that's probably something that would make you friends if you're on like a night out or at a party or whatever. If you've got someone that's taking photos, you're going to end up chatting to them, aren't you?
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
And she was also an incredible artist. And she's still got her Instagram is still up.
So did you have a look at the art?
Yeah, and it was incredible.
I did see some of it because she'd showed it to one of her friends, and there was pictures that I saw, and I thought, oh wow, that is actually amazing. And I thought you'd be straight on that, having a look at the art.
Yeah. So she was incredibly talented. She'd gone to the University of Lincoln and studied a marketing and advertising degree. She'd graduated, and then she'd said, right, okay, what I want to do now is travel. So I'm going to travel for a year, or up to a year, and then see what happens next.
Yeah, and she was from Essex, I think, wasn't she, originally?
Yes.
So from Essex and went to uni in Lincoln.
Yeah. So she's graduated university. So she was 22 at the time that she decided to then go travelling. Again, her mum said that she'd always wanted to go to places like Australia and New Zealand, things like that. And she was quite happy to go out there and make friends while she was there.
She must have been quite confident as well, because it's one thing like travelling on your own. I've gone away before on my own and travelled on my own, but not for a long amount of time. And to know that, to feel confident in that she could just go that far and just make friends while she was there. She must have been confident in herself as a social person as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for her, social media was quite good because there were like big backpacking groups and stuff like that, like activity type groups where, you know, if you want to do certain, what are the things called that are the big...
Like group excursion things.
Yeah, like
tour.
landmarks.
Yes,
for example.
Yeah.
So
like tourist attractions.
We got there in the end. We got there in the end. So for tourist attractions and things like this, there's like different groups so that you can meet up with a group of people. And like you say, then you all go around together. So I think from what I could gather, she'd been posting quite a bit on like forums like that.
Yeah, and there was actually a Facebook group for her backpackers sort of hostel that she'd stayed in as well. So I'm guessing if you know that you're staying there, you can join the group and say who's here between this time and this time.
Yes.
And then you can make friends and sort of get to know each other a little bit before you go and work out what you want to do.
It's a bit like when you go to uni, isn't it?
I was just going to say that, before you go to uni. And ours had a student accommodation, and you typed in what flat you were in, and then if someone saw it, they'd comment underneath. And I remember for days, I was scrolling for days thinking like, oh my God, please find someone who's in my flat. Let me find out who I'm living with. And eventually I think I found a couple of people on there before I'd even got to uni. So it was quite nice, like, because I know it's a bit different going to uni and going travelling, but it's still like a little bit daunting, isn't it?
Oh yeah, massively so. And I think as well, seeing pictures of other people, like she could probably see pictures of these places that she was about to go to.
Yeah.
And that must have just been so like
exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. So on the 26th of October, Grace touched down in Peru, and that's kind of where her adventure began.
Yeah.
So
it looked really nice from the photos as well. Did you
incredible.
see like when she put the like the alpacas on, and I was like, oh my God, like she looks like she's having such a good time.
Oh yeah, completely. And again, she was updating her friends and family, so she was posting on social media, but I think she was also sending them quite a lot of updates so they knew
like personally as well.
Yeah. She was having a great time, she was updating everyone, and she was kind of ticking everything off that she wanted to see at different locations. So after she'd been in Peru, she then decided to travel over to New Zealand.
Yeah.
So the end of October's when she kind of first got out to Peru, and then by December she'd then travelled to New Zealand. Again, somewhere that her mum, Gillian, had said that she'd always wanted to go.
Yeah.
So after she'd ticked off everything she wanted to see in Peru, she then travelled across to New Zealand. So it was on the 20th of November that she then reached New Zealand.
I think she wanted to travel around like the upper part of the island first before heading anywhere else. So I think she was like sort of covering her bases in one area and then move on to the other.
And it did sound like she'd got a plan, didn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't like she was just going to kind of get there and then
decide what to do when she's there.
She probably did that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But we then know that she went on this kayaking trip, didn't she?
Yeah, and she met people on there. She met some friends on there. They said like how adventurous she was. They said she was just like any other sort of person that had joined the trip, because imagine all these people all coming to do the same thing. They are going to be adventurous. They are going to be outgoing because they've all come from different areas.
Yeah, you want to make the most of it, don't you?
Yeah, so they said that, you know, she was a really like sort of fun, social person. And it was actually a guy called Dylan that she met while they were kayaking. And I think at one point they might have been planning to meet up again.
Yeah.
But Dylan actually wanted to stay in this part because he had not sort of finished doing his exploring. He wanted to stay and, you know, sort of have longer there.
Yeah.
Whereas Grace decided that she'd done everything she wanted to do in that area, and then she was ready to move to arrive to Auckland. Yeah.
So by December, she was then in Auckland. And it was actually on the 1st of December that she got there, didn't she? So 1st of December, she gets there, and that was the day before her birthday.
Yeah.
Now, we know that she used to use social media again to kind of make plans with people, meet up with people that were there. And from what we can gather, that's exactly what she did.
Yeah.
It was the night before, it was a Friday night before her birthday. And she'd not got any set plans.
You'd probably be thinking, wouldn't you, like, oh God, it's my birthday tomorrow. Like, I need to get talking to someone, or I need to tell people it's my birthday so we can arrange to do something and like get something sort of organised.
Yeah.
So Grace actually decided to go on Tinder and try and find someone and meet up with someone and get some sort of plans for a birthday.
Yeah, you want to go out for drinks.
You do,
whatever,
don't you?
So.
And if like a lot of people who are travelling have actually said, yeah, you would probably use dating apps to find like local people to even show you around, to tell you where to go, to what bars and restaurants to go to. So it was quite a normal thing to just jump on a dating app.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good for location as well, because you can change your location. I didn't realise, but because I've never had the forethought to do this, but some people change the like distance of or where they are location wise before they've even got there.
So then you show up in that location and then people can already see you coming.
Yeah, so you can kind of make plans.
Oh, yeah.
In advance.
I didn't even know you could do that. I mean, I've not been on a dating app for about 10 years, so I'm sure it's changed a bit since then. But yeah, it was quite a normal thing to, you know, to do these things and jump on a dating app to try and make friends and meet people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on Tinder, she actually met a guy called Jesse Shane Kempson, and they arranged to meet up. So they started talking on the Friday night, and she'd said, oh, it's my birthday, I've not got plans. So he'd said to her, oh, well, Saturday night, why don't we go out? So they'd arranged to meet up the next night. So I think she was quite probably happy that she'd found someone to go out with. She'd got plans on her birthday and probably quite looking forward to it, as she's not been there that long either. You think she's not even been there a full 24
probably
hours.
Probably not unpacked a suitcase.
Yeah, she's just finding something to wear for her birthday. So they did actually arrange to meet up for food and drinks on the Saturday at a Mexican, and it was in a place near Sky City. And from what I could see, it did look like quite a busy area, like full of
really
restaurants, bars, loads of things to do. So it's not like she was going to meet someone somewhere secluded. You're literally out in the open. It reminded me of like a big shopping centre but full of like food and drink. So everything was in one place. And CCTV actually showed Grace meeting up with Jessie for the drinks. They got to each other, they gave each other a hug.
Again, because she was updating her friends, wasn't she? She said to her friends, like, oh, guys, I've got plans, I'm going to go on a date, like, I'll keep you posted kind of thing. And she did give them a bit of an update, didn't she?
Yeah, she'd said, you know, it's going really well, we've really clicked, and I will update you in the morning. But she did tell her friends that Jessie had said he was the manager of an oil company. and that he lived in a hotel. So I think that could sound quite impressive.
Yes.
You know, if you just come out of uni and you're doing your travelling and stuff and you find someone who, you know, seems like he's got his feet on the ground, seems like he can, you know, show you these nice places and go out to these restaurants, show you where to go when you're in the area.
And Jesse was a little bit older as well, wasn't he? So he was 26.
Yeah.
She was 22. So again, not a massive age gap, but it is one of those things where when you're on a first date, he's slightly older, he's got an impressive job.
Yeah.
You would be.
Yeah, he did come across sort of bigging himself up, didn't he?
Yeah.
A little bit.
So she basically said to her friends it was all going well and that she'd like basically update them in the morning about the night that she'd had.
Yeah. So that was on the 1st of December, and on the 2nd of December, when Grace doesn't return to her backpackers hostel, then people start to raise the alarm and get pretty concerned, weren't they?
Yeah.
I was surprised how quickly people got concerned, because you don't really know these people that well.
No.
So if it's someone you don't know, you think they could have stayed out, they could have moved on, they could have gone somewhere else. I mean, obviously her belongings will have still been there. And I think it's really good how they raised the alarm so quick. And on the documentary, the police officer was saying that her friends, well, not even friends, people that she'd met there in the hostel, when he got off the bus to the area where he was going, there was already missing posters up.
Incredible.
And I thought, that is crazy, because she's known these people for, you know, not a long amount of time.
But I think that goes to show what a great person she must have been.
Yeah, because, to make an impression already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To have made such an impression, to have probably told them what she was doing so that they were aware of it. So she was thinking kind of safely.
Yeah.
They then knew that something wasn't right from the off.
Yeah.
And equally as quickly, her friends and family from back home thought that something was wrong.
Yeah.
Because at this point, it is now her birthday.
Yeah.
And people have been sending messages, and she's not been replying to anyone.
And if you think how she's been on social media up to this point, like posting on her Facebook, she was posting when she was everywhere she's been, she was posting all these you know, photos from her trip.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden she's not replying to people when you're on social media all the time. It's very
and you'd
concerning.
think that there'd be like a morning of, this is the view on my birthday, or like here with a drink celebrating.
Birthday in Auckland or whatever,
But no one had heard from her, and to the extent that a couple of friends had actually sent her multiple messages saying like, this isn't like you.
But then it's hard as well, because with her being literally at the other side of the world, like you've got to take into consideration the time difference as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, her friends might have been messaging her at first and thought, oh yeah, I've got to check what time it is over there, or, you know, there could be anything.
And there is like, my friend lives in Australia. Hi Sass. I still struggle with the time difference now, and she's been there for like over a year. Yeah. So because Grace was moving around and she'd only just really got to
She's
Auckland,
going through all the time zones,
like
didn't she?
Yeah, your friends had kind of have no idea what was going on.
Yeah, so it was about lunchtime that the alarm was raised, and a missing persons report then came into the police station. And it was Scott Beard, who was a detective inspector at Auckland Police, who actually picked up the report that had come in. And he did actually say sometimes they do get quite a lot of missing person reports in, because it is full of travelling people.
Yeah.
And if you're travelling around, he said there's loads of places you could go. There's loads of different like little islands off that you could go to.
Yeah.
And if someone's gone there, they might not have phone signal. They might have just gone out on a day trip somewhere.
Yeah.
So they do actually get a lot of missing persons reports when in fact the person is not missing. So for this to come in and at first hand, he probably thought, oh, it's fine, we're going to find her. She'll be travelling, she'll be doing this, she'll be doing that.
Yeah, it's more of a matter of just making sure she's safe, rather
like doing a
than,
double check.
Yeah, rather than finding a missing person.
Yeah. So when she's not got in touch with people for a birthday, she's not returned home, like everyone has become concerned. And her friends actually messaged Dylan, who she met beforehand on the kayaking trip, to say like, oh, have you heard from her? She decided to sort of come back to you to finish off, like if she wants to do something else, like is there anything? and he'd not heard anything at all. So the missing posters had already gone up, and I think it was that night there was an appeal out on the news straight away, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, by the 4th, which again is only a couple of days later, it was in mainstream news, both in New Zealand, but also back here as well.
Yeah, so the UK media had picked up on it pretty quick, because obviously it's one of their own, isn't it, that's gone missing.
Yeah.
They wanted to do everything they could to possibly help, even though was something that had happened so far away.
Because again, social media, we know how far it can reach. So I think the thought was, you know, if we know roughly where she is, if we can just share it as much as possible, then hopefully someone might have seen her, or again, might have plans with her coming up.
Yeah.
So they might be able to, you know.
They actually did a video appeal on social media. I think it was on Facebook, and some of the journalists were saying like it is the biggest response they'd seen. Like it got shared so many times. You know, shares, comments, like in here, all the way sort of across the world. And she was really, really shocked by, you know, the amount of people that had got involved with this.
Yeah, from the off as well. Because usually it does pick up traction, but this did seem incredibly quick.
Yeah. So it was not just on social media, it was like across the news channels, it was in, you know, everywhere that you can think of, sort of news related, social media, news, radio stations.
Her parents were obviously quite quick to do like a press appeal as well.
Yeah.
Because she was incredibly close to her family, so it made complete sense for them to...
Yeah, the Grace's dad, David, actually said she's really fun-loving, but she's also like such a family-orientated person. She wouldn't not contact us on her birthday. Like we've spoke to her on her birthday. She speaks to family members all the time. Like there's never been, you know, a birthday that we've not spoke to her. Yeah.
She did remind me a lot of myself, if I'm honest, because she seems like she would go out there, be brave, have a lot of fun, but equally you have got that level of awareness that, you know, you're travelling, so you've got to be careful, make friends with people in the hostel, and then keep in touch with your family. I mean, we've got a family group chat and we're on it like every day, posting updates.
Yeah.
So when he said that, I thought, there are some times when your family would just know that something wasn't right.
Yeah, and that sort of leads us on to the social media side of it, really. So the police officer, Scott Beard, talks about how critical social media was in this case, and especially her Facebook. He said, like, young people post a lot, and like we saw on Grace's, she was posting absolutely everything all the time. So the police knew that to sort of start this whole investigation, that they needed to start by looking into her Facebook account, like her posts, because the whole way through travelling, they could have followed where she was from all these posts. Like she documented everything, when she came, what she did, where she stayed. She'd followed the backpackers page on Facebook.
And she'd posted on that recently as well, hadn't she?
Yeah, so she was very, very active on social media. So what the police did is they looked through her posts and they went through her comments as well. And the last person to comment on her post was someone called Jessie Shane. And what did it say now? Beautiful. What were it?
It was a really odd comment. It said something like beautiful, serene energy or something like that. It was
I remember it being something a bit off.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a weird thing to post on, like to comment on someone's Facebook
But because
post.
that was the most recent or the last kind of comment, as far as the police were aware, they thought, right, okay, well, we'll speak to this person. They obviously know who she is enough to be commenting. So they tracked down the Facebook page, realised that it wasn't a fake name, but it wasn't actually...
So it was just his first and his middle name?
Yeah, it wasn't Jessie's full name.
Yeah.
But then the officers had actually messaged him or got in contact with him to ask whether or not they could speak to him regarding Grace.
And I thought it was weird, like on the 6th of December, he just turned up at the police station.
Yeah.
In a 3-piece suit.
So basically, the police got in contact with him and said, like, you know, we'd like to speak to you about Grace. But it was probably as brief as that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They might have said, like...
And they said at this point, there was no like suspicion. He was just the last person to comment. He
Yeah.
might have been the last person to speak to her.
It's just for a statement, isn't it? It's like we say when you are on a victim team, then all you are trying to do is piece together as much information about that person's lifestyle and habits as possible.
Yeah.
So all they're wanting to do with Jesse at this stage is just see probably how he knows Grace.
Yeah.
Whether he knows anything and when they last saw each other.
So when he actually came into the police station, the police found out his full name was Jesse Shane Kempson.
Yeah.
And that was the guy that she had gone on the date with.
Yes.
And to be fair, at the beginning of the interview, you know, they showed a picture and said, do you know this girl? And he said, yep. We went on a date. He said where they went.
But let's go back to the 3-piece suit thing.
Yeah, that was weird, wasn't it?
Yeah, and even the police officer, like the investigator, made a point of saying that it was odd because I guess... Because I thought it was funny because he was like, especially not round here. Like, they're in quite a built-up city.
Yeah.
But he did say that generally, like, even if you're working... You would not be in a 3-piece suit
with like a handkerchief,
and so odd that he'd turned up with such a well presented. And again, if you're kind of taking time out of your day, because it was actually like the following day that Jesse had then just walked into the police station effectively.
Yeah.
But if you know you're going there, you would think like, oh, I'll just get changed before I go. To give my statement or whatever, even if you had been at work. It just seemed very odd.
Yeah, and I don't even think that was his work uniform either. Like, not uniform, yeah. Like,
well,
I don't think that's what he went to work
they
in.
know he was working just like bar jobs, wasn't he?
In a restaurant or something,
So he wouldn't have any reason to be wearing that other than he'd chosen to. So, like you say, he said that they'd been on a date and was open about the fact that he'd met her, but was quite flippant about it.
Yeah, it was. And I think there was something about the way that he was talking in these interviews that really put me on edge.
Yeah.
Very cold, weren't he? Very, like, and at not one point did he say, like, what's happened?
Yeah.
What's happened to her? Where is she? Like, it's as if, well, he already knew.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to ask the police. But at the same time as Jesse's in the interview room, the police are actually piecing together the CCTV footage from everything. So I feel like it all came together hand in hand because as Jesse's saying it and he's writing it down on his statement, the police are piecing it together so they can see if these statements are aligning. And I think up to a certain point, they were, you know, they did meet up. He said he went and gave her a hug. There was footage of him hugging her.
Yeah, kissing on the cheek. Yeah. And then another odd thing was then they said, right, well, where did you go? And they'd met at the Sky Bar that you mentioned, and then they'd walked to this burger place. And the officer kind of said, oh, like, who picked where you went? Was it you or was it her? And he said, oh, well, I wanted to make sure that it was safe.
Oh,
so I picked the burger bar in case she wasn't real.
In case she was a catfish.
But at first he was like, in case she wasn't real. And the guy was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, oh, have you ever heard of catfishing? And then again, it was like, I'm going to tell you something that you don't know.
Yeah.
And then explained that, you know, some people aren't always who they say they are, so it's good to meet in public locations. Was saying how busy it would be and that there'd be cameras. But it just all
Why did that
really
benefit
odd.
him, though? Because if you meet someone and they're not the person that they say they are, he's like, oh, it's all right because I'm surrounded by people, I can just leave. But it didn't really make sense. He was saying, oh, well, yeah, there's security. Well, how is security going to help you if a girl's not who she says she is? Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it
she
didn't
doesn't
really
look like her profile pictures. You don't need security. You just
leave.
Say,
you just say, make an excuse and leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really strange, the whole thing. So Jesse actually said that they went their separate ways at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
Well, around 8 p.m. But obviously, he will have known that there was CCTV.
And it also just seemed odd that, like, again, unless you're having a really bad time on a date, generally
To go home at 8.
Yeah, to just go home at 8 sent weird. She obviously wanted to enjoy it. It was like her birthday drinks.
Yeah.
She'd said that they were getting on really well.
Yeah.
Footage of them in that Sky bar when they
showed they were getting on.
Yeah, he said that they'd got on well. So then why just suddenly kind of cut it short? Something a bit odd. But that's what he said had happened. And then he said that, again, a little kiss on the cheek. They'd gone their separate ways. And then he decided to go to a pub further down the road or whatever.
On his own.
So he obviously then wanted to stay out.
Yeah.
So that didn't make sense. But then said that they were like, oh, did you have a few drinks there? And he was like, yes, I had 10 drinks.
I was going to say, it's very precise and it is a lot to keep count of. Like, I might go out on a night out and have 10 drinks, but I'm not counting
them.
How many I've had in case I get called in to the police station the next day for something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So how would you know how many drinks you had? I thought that was a very odd comment to make.
So he then said he had his 10 drinks, obviously was then drunk, so then walked back to his hotel room, which is where he was living, and then didn't wake up till between 10 and 10:30 the next morning.
Yeah.
And that was that. So meanwhile, the police are obviously checking all of this.
Yeah.
Like you say, there was CCTV of them meeting initially at the Sky Bar. Then he'd mentioned the burger place. So they're now...
It's easy to piece together though, because he actually said, we said goodbye at this certain crossroads. So they tracked like from where they met to where they drank, to where they moved on to even where they walked, to even the intersection.
Yeah.
And then the police officer said to him, didn't he, well, at this intersection then, did you go this way? And he went, and she went that way.
Yeah.
It's like as if the police weren't going to get it on CCTV.
Yeah. I guess because he was then outside... He maybe didn't factor in that there are generally in big cities like that, there is CCTV outside as well as in buildings.
But then again, maybe how clear it is as well. He might have thought, oh, how are they going to find me and one girl in like a very busy place? I'm guessing at that time of night it will have been a busy area. So unless he was thinking that, and they might not be able to say, that's definitely him.
Yeah. So the police obviously then wanted to liaise, check with their team to see what CCTV footage they'd actually got. So they basically said to Jesse, like, we're just going to have a bit of a break.
Yeah.
At this stage, again, he's just in for information giving purposes. You know, a statement about how he knows Grace. Nothing more than that. At this point, when they go for the break, he says, sorry, can I just ask a quick question? Am I being arrested for something I didn't do? And they were really good because they were quite flippant with him and they were just like, you're not being arrested, mate. Like, why would you...
I just think it's a very strange thing to say.
And I'm not being funny, but, you know, in any country, when you get arrested, you know about it. Do you know what I mean? They would make it pretty clear. They have to.
You are being arrested.
Reasons, make it pretty obvious that you are being arrested. So why he... said that was just odd.
Very strange.
So the police obviously then clocked that was strange, but then just left him and then went and found the CCTV to prove or disprove what he was saying.
Yeah.
So again, they have this break, and after that, the CCTV footage, as you've just said, linked each place perfectly, and timings were like to the minute of where he was at what point.
Well, he'd actually said the right timings and the right places, but said something else happened.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's odd. It's very, very, very strange in general.
So they saw instantly that he'd lied. Like you say, he'd been honest to a degree, but then he'd lied about them going their separate ways. That just didn't happen. And when he then was presented with the evidence that they said, well, hang on a minute, because you said you went different ways at the intersection and you clearly didn't, because they'd not asked a direct question, because they'd just kind of presented him with this evidence, he just said, is there something you wanted to ask? Like, again, just cocky.
Yeah.
Like, have you got a question there? Or
it is. It's almost like he thinks he's above the police, or that he can outsmart them or outwit them.
Yeah.
Is very narcissistic behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. definitely.
Very.
So they then saw that Grace had basically got to the Sky Bar where they were meeting half an hour early, and he had actually been downing, from what they could see on CCTV, 4 bottles of beer in half an hour before their meeting point or meeting time. He'd then had 4 bottles of beer, gone to meet her, and then, as he'd said, or they'd proven, they'd gone to the burger bar. About an hour and a half later, they then left there, headed back outside, and then went to the Mexican cafe.
Yeah.
While they were there, they had 2 jugs of margaritas, a jug of sangria. So again, quite clearly having a good
night, yeah.
And about another hour and a quarter after that, and this is what he didn't factor in at all in his initial statement, they then went to the Bluestone room, which is like another bar. So this is now at about 8:40. So again, he says they've gone the separate ways.
At 8 o'clock.
Yeah. But at 8:40, he's then seen in this bar. Again, he in the CCTV of it, and he's like tapping someone on the shoulder and saying hello. So if he didn't want to be seen, he wasn't making it very...
No.
obvious.
He wasn't being very discreet, was he?
Yeah. He was being too obvious, I should have said. Yeah. So then he kind of is seen pulling Grace in for a kiss, and from that point on, they were then kissing quite a lot. Again, first date, you would be.
Yeah.
So then about 9:30, they're then seen leaving the bar, and then heading back to his hotel, which is where he was living.
And there was CCTV, wasn't there, of them coming in through the foyer?
Yeah.
And it clearly shows Grace and Jessie together, and then getting in the lift, and there was clear CCTV in the lift of them both together when they're going up to his floor and getting out of the lift on his floor.
And again, we say clear CCTV because we've talked about it before. Quite a lot of the time, it's really grainy and pretty terrible quality. It wasn't at all in this case.
No, it was really good, wasn't it?
Yeah, really good.
And if you, a bit off track, but if you watched the documentary, how creepy was the opening when it was the CCTV of him in the lift.
Yeah.
And he turned around and he looked directly at the camera. Yeah, that gave me chills. That I actually got goosebumps.
See, for me, the bit that made me really emotional is when you see Grace smiling, happy, getting into the lift, and that's the last footage anyone has of Grace before she was then brutally murdered.
Yeah.
So there's clear evidence of them going back to his hotel together. So we now know categorically that he lied about pretty much the whole evening.
Yeah.
And at that stage, she is then not seen getting back into the lift and leaving.
Yeah.
As you would expect to see.
Yeah, even like the next morning they could have checked and, there's enough CCTV in the hotel, isn't there?
Yeah.
To have picked something up.
However, CCTV did show that at 8 o'clock in the morning, Jessie then gets into the lift. And that's...
He told the police that he didn't wake up, didn't he, until sort of like between...
10 and half 10. So, again, and that's when they knew that chances are, he's got something to do with Grace's disappearance. So they then had enough reason to search his hotel room because that was the last place that Grace was then seen. Yeah.
At one point, though, the police had held him for long enough and they did actually have to release him because there wasn't enough evidence to be able to actually charge him and say he has done something to Grace. And imagine how the police officers must have felt having to release that person but knowing there's something not right.
Yeah.
It's horrible, isn't it?
So they did search the room, and straight away when they did luminol testing, they saw an awful lot of blood.
Yeah, so luminol is something that you spray, and you can spray it over an area where you think there is blood, and the luminol reacts with the blood and it actually turns to like a glow-in-the-dark blue colour. So if you turn the lights off you can then see everywhere where there's blood. And in this case, it was actually on a dark red carpet, so it was quite hard to see it just with your own eyes. Yeah, it would have been
hard to identify just...
And I've used luminol before and I was actually shocked by it. So you have to do spray quite a lot. And then when we turned the lights off, literally just glowed up everywhere. And you can even see sometimes if it's on like not carpet, on a hardwood floor, where people have tried to clean up and they've gone in with like a cloth or something and they've gone over like in a circular motion, you can see that circular motion of blood in the luminol. That's how clear it is.
If anything, with luminol, it makes it 10 times more obvious if you have tried to clean up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it just spreads
you can see
out
everything. Yeah. So the carpet was actually covered, wasn't it, in blood. And when they showed those photos, I was quite shocked at the amount of blood just in that one
space,
that one area.
Yeah. So at that point, they then inevitably upgraded the investigation to a murder inquiry.
Yeah, from a missing
rather
person.
than a missing persons. Yeah. And again, there's a hell of a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So they're now searching Jesse's mobile phone. They've got enough reason to believe that he's the kind of lead suspect, and they're now searching his phone. And he'd actually, on like early morning of the 2nd, about 1:30 in the morning, been doing Google searches, which
questionable to say the least.
Yeah, exactly. Gave himself away massively.
Straight away, didn't it? There were sort of things like what can burn anything, what are the hottest fires, but then in between all this, he was searching porn as well.
Yeah, and he also then searched for a specific area of woodland, which would then later be identified as the location.
Yeah, some Whitaker Ranges, I think it were, Whitaker Range.
Yeah. But bear in mind, when he's doing these searches on Google, that is the exact time in which Grace is then laid dead, having been murdered in his hotel room, and all he is doing is trying to cover his tracks.
Yeah, but not only covering his tracks, the porn thing in the middle.
Yeah. So it was all, and they were all quite like graphic, pornographic videos, weren't they? But again, if you've got your phone in your hand, do you not think maybe call
for help? The emergency services?
Yeah.
Try and get help in general?
No. So for me, I think that showed like just how unconcerned he was.
Yeah.
How, and he wasn't fazed by it, which is, if you're just thinking about how to get away with it
there was no reaction to what he'd done.
No. Like if you think of people that have accidentally killed someone before, like manslaughter,
panic.
Quite often people panic, they might throw up.
Ring the police.
Get
help.
He didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
So again, given the amount of evidence, they then re-questioned him, which is then when he gave a completely new account.
It was nothing like, was it, what he'd said in the first place? It was a totally different story.
Yeah, it was a totally different story. He then did admit that they'd gone to the Bluestone and that they'd been kissing a lot, but then says that the next thing he remembered was then being back at the hotel room with Grace, and it was then that Grace started mentioning 50 Shades of Grey.
And did you notice when he said 50 Shades of Grey, he was like, as into the officers, oh, do you know what that is?
Yes, exactly. I was just about to say that. It was like explaining what it was.
And explaining to the police officers what that was. And whether they knew or not, it was like as if he was presuming. Like, well, I know what it is. Why do you not? He was just so cocky, wasn't he?
And for me, it was just the fact that you've gone from saying that you'd gone separate ways to now saying like, oh yeah, well, Grace was talking about 50 Shades of Grey to me. Do you know what I mean? It all just seemed very like self-serving.
Yeah.
So he then did state that they'd had violent sex.
Yeah.
And he then said that he had grabbed her by the throat. But then after they'd had sex, he then went and got in the shower and then claims to have fallen asleep in the shower. Initially then woke up and at whatever time had just assumed that Grace would have left at that point.
Yeah.
He then gets out of the shower, goes back into the hotel room, and at that stage, he says his claim was that he saw her lying on the floor with blood coming out of her nose. He then panicked and tried to move her to see if she was awake. Again, saying is she awake was an odd turn of phrase. Like, surely you'd be like, to see what had happened to her, to see if she was okay, to see if she was alive. But he was just like, oh, just to see if she's awake. Like, she'd be choosing to be passed out on the floor.
With blood on her
nose. So it was just such a self-serving account, wasn't it? Like, he gave this other statement, but nothing painted him, or he tried not to paint himself in a bad light. He was basically like, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. It's her that had wanted the violent sex in the first place, and then I tried to make sure she was all right.
Yeah.
At that point, they then asked why he'd not called for help, and he just said that he'd panicked and that he was freaking out.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't buy any of what he's saying whatsoever. The whole way through this first interview and the second interview.
Yeah.
Like, I just think he was so blasé about everything.
Yeah, really blasé and really matter of fact. And at no point did he ask if she was all right or anything. There was just no concern.
Nothing at all.
It was all very calculated. So, and then he did say that he dialed 111.
And then didn't press call.
And then didn't go through with it. So that was the only bit where I thought, well, that doesn't make you sound good.
No, it doesn't. Why would you even say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I just weren't buying it.
Yeah, said that he knew how bad it looked. So then panicked and decided to just fully cover his tracks.
Yeah. And when he were covering his tracks, to be fair, again, he didn't hide anything. I feel like everything was on CCTV, like every single thing that he did. So he left the hotel room in the morning, and when they got him at 8 a.m, leaving the hotel and going downstairs, he actually went and bought a suitcase. And then there was other CCTV of him buying cleaning equipment, cleaning products.
Well, I've got another bit in there as well. So he said he bought the suitcase because, again, they confronted him about it.
Yeah.
He said that he'd bought the suitcase because he was in shock and that he wasn't really thinking logically. But then, so when he'd bought the cleaning products, there was actually evidence on his phone to suggest that prior to going out and doing that, he'd been arranging another date.
Yes. Oh, saw this bit. So he was arranging a date while Grace was still in his apartment.
Yeah, it was horrific. Why, if you're in shock...
You just don't do that at all, do you? You just don't do that.
Don't know if anyone can hear my stomach.
I've heard your stomach loads of times.
Sorry about that, everyone.
So when we said that the police went through and they Googled, that they were looking at what he'd Googled, and there was that area, the Whitaker's range, that was actually 20 kilometres away. So once this was Googled, they sort of like, that was alarm bells as well for the police. And his cell phone actually pinged out on the Whitaker's range. And they thought, right, okay, he's been out there. So he's Googled it, and then he's been out there as well.
Yeah.
And that's when the police decided to deploy a search team out there. And it was quite a big area, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When you look at it, it was quite like a big woodland area. So at the same time as all this is going on, there is also a search team that have gone out to this, to this area.
They'd also, so he'd been out and bought the cleaning products. He'd then put all of Grace's possessions into like a black bag.
Yeah, this was weird, wasn't it?
And then just walked through the city, like nothing was happening. Walked through the city with this big like black bag, and then just put it, again in quite a busy area, in like a public rubbish bin.
Yeah.
And just like shoved it in there.
What I found really chilling as well was that he said that he had put the suitcase in the back of his hire car, and there was then CCTV of him buying a spade. that red orange coloured spade.
Yeah.
And just seeing him buy that and the cleaning products, you think, oh my God, this is like so thought through and planned.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a man who's panicked. This is a man who's got something wrong with him.
Yeah.
Definitely not something all
there. Well, even like if you think about the length of time after the fact that he'd probably killed Grace quite soon after she was last seen.
Yeah.
On that CCTV footage, to the amount of time that he then spent ordering a hire car, going out and buying the cleaning products, going out and buying the suitcase, picking up a spade from a shelf in a shop, you would think there would be something that would trigger you going, fuck, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What have I done?
What am I going to do? Yeah.
And break down, then ring the police. There was nothing.
There was nothing all the way through.
There were so many moments that he could have.
I agree.
But he didn't. He continued to be calculated about it.
Yeah, and while this search was going on, they actually did recover Grace's body. And when the police were making the statement, it was horrible, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was very upsetting. Even the officers were.
Yeah, the investigator got really choked up, didn't he, when he announced it? But they'd actually told Kempson that he had to come out and show them where Grace's body was.
Yeah, because obviously it's a big area, isn't it? Yeah. That's even more chilling, isn't it? Taking him with you and saying, right, where is it? And him directing you and still having no emotion.
Yeah, just disgusting.
Yeah.
So they then found, again, it was suspected to be Grace's body at this stage. They said obviously they needed to do an official confirmation.
Identification,
but that they were pretty sure. And again, if he's taken them there, that's...
Unless it's someone else that is put there as well.
Yes. Yeah.
It's likely going to be Grace, isn't it?
But then obviously there was a post-mortem, and at that stage they identified that Grace was strangled to death. She'd been strangled to death for between 7 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, so when you strangle someone, obviously you're cutting off the blood supply, their oxygen, and you will then go dizzy and pass out. It's quite obvious that someone has passed out and has gone lifeless.
Yeah.
So for you then to carry on for, I think that'd probably be about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
For you then to carry on for a further 7 minutes.
Well, equally, sometimes when people pass out, again, if it's the lack of like airflow, you can actually fit.
Yeah.
So again, whether or not it's lifeless or whether or not it's fitting, neither of those options are, this is okay, I can continue.
I can carry on, yeah. Yeah, it's actually disgusting, isn't it? Like when I was listening to this with the 7 to 10 minutes, I found that really shocking.
Yeah, that is not rough sex.
No.
He stated that Grace and he had had rough consensual sex.
Yeah, and she'd asked him to do it.
That is not the case.
For that amount of time.
Yeah.
Like,
he never called anyone for help, and then, like you say, he was actually looking for videos on sex sites whilst she was there, laid dead in the hotel room.
Yeah.
He also took photographs of her body after she'd been killed, and police identified that they'd actually been staged. He'd actually manipulated her body to take those photographs of her.
Right.
That is not something that you do if you have accidentally killed someone during sex.
It's almost like he knew what he wanted to do, and he knew what he'd wanted to do afterwards as well, because like you said, it's not just a passing thought to position someone and take photos of their body.
I think that there was clear sexual gratification that he'd obviously got through the killing of Grace, because of then the staged photographs, and then the fact that he was looking at the porn sites, and then going back on Tinder the following morning to arrange another date. He clearly was getting some gratification from what had happened.
Do you think if like all this wouldn't have come to light and he went on like other dates, do you think that he would have done the same again because he'd have thought he'd have got away with it?
Absolutely, yeah. Because again, as we're about to talk about, there was signs of escalating behaviour within him. So if Grace was in fact his first murder victim, then just like you say, I think if he'd have got away with it, then that appetite increases.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have just been Grace that would have been killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he actually then went back on Tinder, managed to actually arrange a date, and while Grace was still in his hotel room, he then headed out in the afternoon before he'd bought the suitcase and met up with a woman that he'd been texting. So the whole afternoon he basically spent out with another woman, and whether or not that was like for an alibi or what, I don't know, but she said that he seemed pretty calm and
pretty normal,
and there wasn't anything kind of awry.
All the people that saw him as well that were interviewed by the police, not one of them said like, oh, he was panicked, he was something odd, he was upset, they were like, he was just normal,
calm. Yeah. So then after meeting this other woman for a date, he got back to the room about 5:45 on the 2nd, and then called Rug Doctor, which was a brand for carpet cleaning, and said that he had or hired a rug doctor, and then said that it was just because he'd spilt some red wine and that's what he needed to clean up. So again, also calculated, and he is known to be a liar, so this is where his previous comes in. He has been known to be intimidating and make women feel uncomfortable. So much so, again, you were going to mention about the housemate, weren't you?
Yeah, there was a girl, Millie Mason, and she had advertised on Facebook because she was in a shared house and there was a few of them and they'd got a spare room. So they put this advert out and he'd replied to the advert. And she said he sounded like quite a professional person. He came across quite nice. He'd got loads of like stories, seemed like he got quite a lot of life experience. She thought he was really going to fit in. Yeah. But she said his stories were extravagant, and he said he was here to buy a restaurant. I think said it was his family business. He was here to franchise. And it was really weird because Millie said the restaurant that he was trying to buy, she actually knew the owner and the owner wasn't selling the restaurant. And it was one night that she went to that restaurant and he was actually there working behind the bar. So he was just working at this restaurant. He wasn't buying the restaurant. And then she said that's when she knew that he was like lying about things were really extravagant, and he came home drunk one night and scared one of the other housemates who was also female, and she actually slept with a knife because she was that scared for her safety.
Absolutely disgusting.
It is in your own house.
That scared, in
your own house. And she just said at that point we knew that there was something odd about him, that none of us wanted to be alone in the situation with him. None of us wanted to be in the house when he was there, and it was just like not a very nice
I found it awful that she kind of said, I wish there's something more that we could have done.
Yeah, but you don't know, do you?
No, she could never have known. And they'd obviously spoken to people about the fact that he'd made them uncomfortable. But what more can you do?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You can't, can you?
No. But I thought that was so kind of heartbreaking, but also lovely of her that she kind of wanted to have protected Grace.
Yeah, so there's that, and it was obviously things building up. Yeah,
so he was also a known sexual offender.
Yeah.
So after a Tinder date with a 21-year-old, she refused to have sex with him, at which point he forcibly assaulted her because she had refused to have sex with him.
Right.
She had actually kept the attack secret because she was so ashamed of what had happened until she recognised Kempson from media footage on the news.
Oh my God.
Horrific.
I bet that's horrible for her as well, because she will be thinking in her head, what if I wouldn't have kept quiet?
Yeah.
But then she had her own reasons for keeping quiet, and no one can say it's right or wrong in what she did, what was right for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you say, you don't know, what someone's going through even before that's happened to them.
Yeah.
She might not be in a place that's...
Yeah, that she can.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So he'd also been previously convicted, so he'd actually gone to trial for other offences before Grace's murder had even happened. And at one of these trials, he was convicted of effectively terrorising his living girlfriend over a period of months.
Right.
So she'd been subjected to violent assaults. He'd threatened her with a knife, a butcher's knife, and then again forced humiliating sex acts upon her. Right. So again, sexually assaulted her, and was just really calculated.
Yeah.
Calculated to the extent that he'd actually said that he'd been sent by the CIA to kill her.
What?
So, but just beating someone down in every way, that's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual
everything,
abuse.
Yeah.
So clearly was escalating, like we've mentioned. And during that trial, he actually verbally abused the judge as well.
Wow.
When he was sentenced, he actually shouted to the judge, "You have no reason to convict me. You're full of shit, mate," is what he said.
What the hell?
But imagine, and the disregard for like calling a judge mate is like on its own. Never mind again, the swearing at the judge and
it's that narcissistic behaviour of him thinking he's above everyone.
Yeah, it's the contempt, isn't it? He's just got complete contempt. Yeah. So again, no surprise really, but he pleaded not guilty and stated that Grace had enjoyed rough sex. That's not a justification. It's not a defence. We've talked about how difficult it is to actually strangle someone to death.
Yeah.
The amount of time in which it takes.
And he just blamed her throughout, didn't he?
Yeah.
In general, I thought it was absolutely horrendous how he was just blaming everything on
vile.
Grace. There was no accountability, no responsibility, no emotion, nothing.
No. And he was cool, calm and calculated the entire way through this. And just had complete disregard. And again, if we go back to that CCTV footage of him in the lift, the one that you're talking about is when he's actually pushed the suitcase with Grace's body in it into the lift.
So he got a trolley, didn't he? One of the big suitcase trolleys.
Yeah, and looks directly up at the camera.
Yeah,
so
it's horrible.
When the trial was over, the jury was actually only out for an hour.
That's very, very quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think with the amount of evidence in this case...
they didn't need any more time.
No. And so he was jailed for 17 years without parole, but that would run then concurrently with... It was actually 2 other sentences he'd already got of 11 years. So I know
everything
UK,
just runs alongside, yeah.
So I know in the UK we wouldn't mention previous offences, but because he'd already got 2 current sentences.
Yeah.
They
were all at the side of each other, yeah. Whereas in America, they would probably have run consecutive, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Consecutive, when the one after the other. They'd have added them up, wouldn't they? Whereas in the UK and obviously in here as well.
Yeah. So, again, it just made me so angry. The whole rough sex defence, that then became controversial, and it was in the news as to, how it shouldn't even be a potential defence.
Yeah.
It's not, when you know the realities of having to kill someone in that way, it's not a defence, because you would very quickly realise that they are unconscious.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's not sex at that point. You are making a conscious choice to continue to kill them.
Yeah.
But I think, hopefully, if nothing else, it's made people a lot more aware of the fact that that is completely unacceptable. It's not something that men can use as a defence to try and get away with their actions.
Literally get away with murder.
Yeah, it's disgusting, but at least there's now more awareness
Yeah, and talking about awareness, there is actually the Love Grace campaign, and that is where they're empowering victims of domestic violence, and they get handbags and fill them with things and give them to victims, and over 10,000 handbags have been handed out, and Grace's mom said it was like 10,000 smiles.
Yeah, Gillian.
And I was like, she's done so much, hasn't she, to sort of raise awareness for this sort of thing and do a lot for women in domestic violence. Unfortunately, Grace's dad was diagnosed with cancer shortly after the trial, and he actually died in 2020.
So I can't imagine the loss that Gillian's been through, because not only did you have that with her, obviously her daughter, but then losing your husband as well. The only person that would probably really understand to the extent in which you'd gone through together.
It's your husband.
Yeah. But again, Gillian continues to fight and campaign and get her daughter's name out there.
Yeah.
So that's it for today's case. Again, thank you so much for listening. Another heavy one.
It is, isn't it? I was just thinking that, and it's quite a long one as well, that.
Yeah.
So we'll not really say too much at the end.
No.
Should we just leave them with it and wrap it up?
Yeah. So we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Take care.